Good afternoon, everyone. This is Rachel, your host or facilitator, as we'll say it today. We'll get started in about one minute. We'll just give, I see a few people still coming in, so we'll just give them a couple moments. Okay, we'll get started. We'll call that my version of a minute. So welcome everyone to the 4 foundations to a streamlined and collaborative RFP creation process webinar. And just so we'll initially start with a little bit of housekeeping, and I just wanted to highlight too, we will be recording today's webinar. We've already commenced recording. So if you do have to leave earlier, or if you do want to share the recording with any of your colleagues, we really do encourage that, and that will be sent to you in the coming days following the webinar. In addition, you can probably see there's a chat Q&A session designated at the end. So I will try to make sure I pace accordingly so you can get to all your questions. But I do highlight, and for many of you who have joined webinars with me, I'll introduce myself more in a moment. I do peruse the chat throughout, so I will encourage you to put in questions or comments. I will sometimes pose questions at yourselves and encourage a dialogue in the chat as well. So the goal here, even though there's an element of a one-sided monologue, is very much so that yourselves are able to engage and sort of provide feedback, because we have opened this up, just so you're all aware, to both those who are using and are not using the Bonfire platform around North America specifically. So you are representing yourself from various regions and zones, so we understand that there's unique perspectives that we want to highlight today as well. On that note, so this is the flow for today. We'll be looking at procurement right now as it stands, and we'll really go through RFP efficiency and the 95/5 rule. We'll then focus on siloed versus collaborative RFP creation, and then we'll really end it into this forward look and looking towards the future. And for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to work with or connect with before, my name is Rachel Friesen. I lead our customer experience team here at Bonfire. So really the moment that if you decide to work with Bonfire, the moment that you close and onboard our tool, that's really my team that's supporting you going forward. So I'm very grateful to say that as my role has evolved here, I've had the opportunity, I would say, to work directly with over 100 public-facing agencies around North America. Does that make me an expert? No, yourselves are the expert, but it does allow me to have some perspective, and I really enjoy these opportunities to connect with yourselves. Perfect. So we really wanted to highlight, and as I get started, and again, the chat's open, so feel free to connect in there at any time. It's very important to start off today really acknowledging yourselves and how procurement and purchasing really kept our communities thriving during the pandemic. I know that, depending on your location, the pandemic is very much a reality still or not, or there's interpretations there, of course, but either way, over the past 2 years, yourselves is what moved our societies along and kept us functioning. So really, really wanted to acknowledge your time. Thank you for being a critical function of society. We often like to highlight here at Bonfire too, in the Canadian landscape, how all of a sudden your everyday Canadian pretty much knew the name of the Minister of Public Services and Procurement in Canada, which was probably Philomena Tassi is her name, which was probably not a name, the average citizen knew previously. So yourself sort of had that limelight moment that was really, really, really key and important. But we really do acknowledge that during that time, we don't want to understate it, that there was this, intensified effort to keep your organizations and your citizens and communities moving essentially along or operating, but at the same time you had this double whammy of doing this critical work, whether it's finding PPE, sanitizer, and you had to do it typically with a lack of resources, whether you didn't have a tool in place, you were working from home, and there was a lot not working in your favor to continue business continuity over the past couple of years. So really just wanted to highlight, very grateful for your experience and what the foundation is that we were working towards. And then going forward, we wanted to highlight this 3-point collision in public procurement. So to set the stage for the importance, and so going forward in today's webinar, of a streamlined and collaborative RFP creation process, let's first look ahead. So what does 22 and the years ahead look like? So let's start with some context on the macro factors that are going to impact the way public procurement teams operate over the next few years. Because of the economic downturn resulting from the pandemic, governments have been injecting funding at a scale we've never seen before. So for example, in the US, yourselves have the ARPA and IIJA funding, which is of course thrusting billions of dollars into the economy. And on the Canadian side, the government has created a number of funding programs, such as Regional Air Transportation Initiative, or RATI, the Canadian Community Revitalization Fund, as well as funding focused on Indigenous projects. So very much the bottom line is that over the next few years, we will see investment by government on a scale that we've not seen before. It's going to be about growth, which is a stark difference, evidently, versus the last 2 years that we just acknowledged, where yourselves and all of us were operating in a pandemic and very much this emergency, potentially scarcity mindset. And it goes without saying that yourselves, purchasing teams, are right in the middle of the downstream implications. For example, in 2021, public agencies ramped up their opportunity, or in Bonfire, we call it project volume. So we saw about 39% more RFPs were run last year than they did in the prior year, 2020, according to our RFP data. And I will highlight, many of you may be thinking, well, that's because there was less formalized opportunities. And completely true, but either way, we did see this upturn. And as a result of massive increases in funding in our current state, the average procurement team could see, it's predicted, an increase of about 2 to 3 times the number of opportunities, projects, for example, RFPs that they'll need to manage, so yourselves need to manage today and in the near future. And then, of course, the other dynamic that we're dealing with is that for many teams, headcount, and this probably hits a little too close to home, was cut during that economic uncertainty. There was actually, and this is probably an anecdote that I haven't shared before, at one point our product team here at Bonfire actually thought there was a glitch with the software, because there was so many users that were disabled all in a short period of time that we actually thought there was something going on, but it was really just indicative and represented that there was mass layoffs occurring across the Canadian and American landscape. And I know from my team's perspective, as we talk to yourselves, and many of you here today are clients, we're very much hearing from yourselves that you haven't recuperated that headcount necessarily. And then when you have this added influx of funding, you're supposed to do more with even less. So that's why I really wanted to highlight, we know that that's a reality right now. And so we will highlight too, there is that great resignation that hit tech, it hit government, though very much, of course, as well. So the government employment, that sector peaked at nearly 20 million workers at the beginning of the pandemic, but we actually did see that results in the sector losing 1.5 million jobs. So we have seen that 607,000 positions have come back, but that's still a huge differential from the 1.5 million to 607,000. And state and local governments are still 920,000 is the difference below where yourselves were before the COVID crisis hit. And this phenomenon, of course, isn't just restricted to the public sector. As I highlighted, over 4.5 million people did quit their jobs in November 2021 alone. In addition, while government employment has endured setbacks during recessions, what's happening now goes beyond that. It has the potential to permanently reshape the future of public sector work. So what you have here is a 3-point collision that is procurement's reality over the next few years. So how do we deal with these forces, especially when many agencies, such as yourselves, still rely on the same tools and processes that you did prior to the pandemic? What levers do you as an agency have to play with when this is the pressure cooker that you find yourselves in for the foreseeable futures? So many teams are realizing that digital transformation is the only way to keep up. So that's driving efficiency with better technology and more streamlined practices, and that's transformed how agencies operate, and we believe for the better. And part of that streamlined approach is what we'll be talking about today. In the midst of these demands, It's evidently critical to establish a solid, collaborative front-end process when developing an opportunity. So, this idea, 99% of success is planning to succeed. It's a piece that often falls through the cracks when teams are overburdened and under-resourced, which is probably all of your reality right now. So bringing the right people and the right information and the right technology to the table from the start is what sets you up for success down the opportunity timeline. So as we move into 2022, it's a great time to review your approach to RFP creation, be aware of inherent gaps, and make sure you have the right tools to sustain a growing number of opportunities. On that note, I think we will actually move into a poll to see where everybody get a bit of the lay of the land. So how much time do you typically spend building an RFP? So we're qualifying that here from when a request comes in to when the solicitation is posted. And I will highlight, we'll get to that later, that benchmarking of when the request comes in can vary very much agency to agency. So you can interpret this as when so-and-so from your team walks up to your desk, or when you get a formal intake. That's your discernment. We'll leave it open for a couple moments, and then we'll share the results so you can see based on your response if you're in, we'll call it good company or not. You might put in a time frame that you'd love to shrink in the future. So asterisks on good company there. But at the end of the day, we all have to start from somewhere. Okay, so we'll close out the poll and peek at the results. Okay, so clear 50% there, 2 to 4 weeks. I wonder if that's surprising to anyone. Probably not, I'm assuming. And then we have a close second, 4 to 8 weeks. Actually, the 2 to 4 weeks is pretty impressive, I would say. So perfect. And anyone's welcome to comment in the chat if you have anything you'd like to share around these results. But we'll close out the poll. Thank you for sharing. And I will share my, sometimes, sorry everyone, when a poll comes up once in a blue moon, my slideshow closes, but it's all part of the experience. So we'll get back to sharing my screen. Perfect. Okay, great. So, so now let's look at this. How do you operate more efficiently and effectively as teams heading into the future? And are there key areas where you could or should direct your efforts in order to realize the most efficiency gains in this context? So if we're looking at Bonfire, the Bonfire data, so in our database, it does tell us that the average time for an RFP from when the request is submitted to when the project is awarded is about 123 days. So if you're like me and you need to kind of wrap your head around that time frame a little bit, it's about 4 months. Then an opportunity is from essentially intake request, and we have in our system like an intake module, so we're capturing that, and then we're going to the awarding date. So that's all accurately put in. We acknowledge, there's always maybe a margin of error where a stakeholder potentially doesn't mark something as awarded at the exact moment it is, but we're looking at about 4 months on average. So you can even think mentally, benchmark your own organization's experience relative to that. So now let's focus on RFP creation. Going a little too fast there, RFP creation. So what we're qualifying as creation is 5 core design elements. The RFP creation process includes everything from the time internal clients come to procurement with a purchasing request all the way up until the solicitation is posted. So this typically includes intake, requirements gathering, research, drafting, and then gathering the required approvals. And I'll acknowledge that can look very different, approvals specifically depending on the type of opportunity, the spend, your agency, all of that. So again, our data at Bonfire does tell us that approximately 26 days are spent in RFP creation. So that means more than 20% of a procurement manager's time on a procurement or an opportunity is spent creating the RFP before it goes to market. So how are those 26 days spent? When you take a siloed approach to RFP creation, you know the drill. Traditionally, it's back and forth game of hurry up and wait. Procurement managers follow up with stakeholders and their price and criteria requirements. Yourselves are reaching out to your peers in search of similar project templates. You are waiting on approvals. You're asked, and you essentially answer all the time updates about project or opportunity status. We always hear anecdotally our agencies that we support talk about, people coming up to their desk when they could. That's maybe sometimes a benefit of working from home, is that you have a bit of a like a barrier between you and those who are demanding a response, essentially. And of course and it's just human nature, people will go to the area or the lowest barrier to entry to communicate with people. But typically you're relying on tools like email to drive communication and move forward approvals, and your time is spent deciphering complex intake requests in non-standardized channels like emails, or parsing out feedback from multiple locations and searching Google templates. And this has just become the norm, right? This has become the traditional approach for creating an RFP. And you can see how it in emails, and you can see how it, suffers because some of the inefficiencies we've talked about. So you do end up getting slowed down, and then you end up becoming over time reliant on these rigid yet all over the place steps that occur. So that's very much the typical flow there. So we're really looking at here, as you can see, is a siloed RFP creation, which is very much the norm that most agencies experience over time. And as you can see, with a siloed 5 core design elements RFPs that we talked about, here are the 3 main characteristics of a siloed approach, all of which can negatively impact the success of a project. So ineffective request for intake and requirements gathering. So important details are buried or overlooked, meaning criteria ends up poorly being defined from the get-go, and the evaluation system that is created doesn't actually support optimal outcomes. Tools and technology, they're unfit to support procurement's needs. So yourselves use a patchwork process characterized by, disconnected digital and paper-based processes, from email to Excel spreadsheets to paper signatures. And that could be also, many of you, and I'll sound biased with this sentence, but I'm okay with it. It could also be a clunky ERP module that is supposed to help with your sourcing process, but for whatever reason, you're forced to use this, but no one likes it. So they'll go outside of that system. So not only does it make collaboration challenging, it also increases compliance risks because of that. And then, another extension that I wanted to highlight was limited stakeholder visibility and transparency. Stakeholders tend to be cut off from RFP creation because there is no centralized way for them to participate or stay in the loop throughout the process. And then this can negatively impact relationships and outcomes. So therefore, naturally, given the obstacles and constraints your team are facing in the early stages of the process creation, it's no wonder that there's a rush to get things done. And unfortunately, feeling rushed could lead to errors, or that could ultimately threaten compliance and not allow anyone to reach their desired outcome. So some of these, elements, for me to be Vanna White here for a moment, probably really resonate with you, as you can see here, whether it's the forward email change, the informal meetings, and it's this patchwork. And it can make it hard to even compound towards a new norm because you don't even have complete visibility over all the goings on to create an opportunity and launch it, just due to, to the point here, this patchwork effect. If some content lives in one system, some content lives in another system. It's just the nature of things. So if we do look instead, kind of flipping over to a collaborative RFP build timeline, in contrast, this is what a collaborative RFP creation process, can and should and could look like. It's a lot more streamlined because A, many parts of the process can be done simultaneously and don't rely on sequential order. B, stakeholders have more visibility into the process and are taking up less of your time by asking questions and requesting updates. And C, there is a lot less back and forth because expectations and requirements were clearly defined from the start at the intake step. And that, ultimately means a shortened timeline for RFP creation, typically 2 to 4 weeks. Although apparently 50% of you are in that. So very impressive. Feel free to put in the chat if you're achieving that time frame and you don't have a streamlined approach, because maybe there's something we can all learn from you. You found another way. So with a collaborative model in place, RFP creation times are faster. This model also leads to higher performing solicitation outcomes, with procurement agencies saving an average of 9.5% on each RFP they complete using an online purchasing tool such as e-procurement. There's an important piece to discuss here, which we do like to call phantom tasks. So they eat up a lot of our days and have us feeling less accomplished than we set out to at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. So when it comes to an RFP build, what phantom tasks are, it's the time you have to take to locate the latest Word doc without edits, from scrolling through email to find a document, the time you spent getting 2 document edits back and having to reconcile them. It's that time that gets, sucked away answering questions about where are we at, the time that you spend nudging people and the approval chain to unblock you. I'm sure some of you are poking people right as you're watching this webinar. So that is very much phantom tasks. And that's, we really acknowledge that we don't want to have those go unaccounted for, essentially. So let's quickly recap and let's take a look at the approaches side by side to see how a collaborative approach to RFP creation wins every time. So you can really clearly see, the benefits here. You have in the negatives or in the siloed approach, the outdated patchwork tools, it fails to capture the right requirements, precarious version control, lack of transparency. And then to really summarize, you have that collaboration for RFP creation, requirement capture, source of truth, visibility, and that can feed into also to highlight mitigating all those that time that's sucked away, because you can over time coach your stakeholders internally or externally to know where to go to get the answers versus you having to poke them or respond to them via email, etc., to get the answers. So on that note, we will go into another poll. So we'll launch that. So collaborating with stakeholders during the RFP building process is a challenge for our team. Does that resonate with you? Strongly, somewhat agree, neutral, disagree, strong disagree. Feels decently polarizing as a question. So my hope is yourselves are in the strong one of the ways, like disagree or agree, but there could be a recency bias based how your last RFP went based on what your experience is. I also know for some of you, it just really depends the scope of your role and the types of opportunities you're running. So fully acknowledge that as well. So we'll keep the poll open for a couple moments, and then when the responses, somewhat die down, for lack of a better word, we will share the results with everybody. Okay, still coming in. Thank you all. I know when I have the when I attend webinars, we're in Eastern time here, post lunch, it can be easy for me to sort of lean back a little too far in my chair and get sleepy. So thank you for being engaged, providing or being so engaged, I suppose. Yeah, and providing your feedback in these polls. We love leveraging these going forward and really looking at trends across the sector. Okay, perfect. So we'll share the results. And, oh, this one's a bit more divided. Interesting. So no, strongly disagree. I will say I'm a little surprised at that, but that's a great takeaway to see. And then, so I will say that many of you disagree. Sorry, agree. I promise I'm drinking my coffee and reading this correctly. Many of you do agree that it is a challenge for your organization. And then we have a pretty literally even split between disagree and strongly disagree. So yeah, it seems like there's a decent mixed bag with this one. But again, we do have that agree stand out. So we'll close out the poll and continue. But thank you so much for sharing those results. And I feel like that's our last poll. So if you do want to lean back in your chair, now is the time. But I would encourage you to stay engaged. So now we really will go into the 4 pillars of RFP creation, or collaboration, I should say, in just a more focused sense. So if any of these siloed practices or challenges that we talked about sound familiar, as you can see with the poll, you're really not alone. The pandemic forced many teams to accelerate their plans and fit years of digital transformation into just weeks or months, or you didn't even have a digital asset to support your organization. And so the result is that many organizations and agencies are dealing with siloed patchwork procurement processes. And many of these agencies have discovered the solution in a centralized procurement platform, or to rephrase it, a catalyst for a new norm through a procurement platform. I will mention as well, due to the labor shortages, we have heard anecdotally a lot of the ideal state got thrown out the window because you were just dealing with this really core team and tribal knowledge, and you just had to accelerate accordingly. But again, we're looking forward now, and what can we do differently? So a collaborative RFP creation process, it does leverage, as we're highlighting, and the ideal state is that you are utilizing best of breed technology to bring enhanced efficiency, communication, collaboration to every opportunity, and it's rooted in 4 key pillars. So that does look like a more flexible layered process, underpinned by real-time communication and approvals throughout the entire RFP creation process. And this even includes the initial stakeholder requests for capturing that as well here. And it's crucial that information brought forward at the start of the process is effectively carried throughout. So think of it as a build of information from intake to posting. So let's look now into these pillars in more detail. So pillar 1, the first pillar of RFP collaboration, is a collaborative RFP request process. So that's also known as your intake process. And I know for many of you, that represents a future state, and you're really working towards enhancing and streamlining and essentially creating a more effective intake process. So based on people being in different places with this, to give a bit of context, but it's obviously not unfamiliar to yourselves, this is a formalized process that's easily accessible to your buyers, internal clients, and leadership team, so that purchasing requests are centralized and visible to all relevant parties. And so this might sound much like what I'm about to describe. For many agencies, these requests come in the form of a forwarded email chain, maybe if that hurried phone call, or the drive-by ask at the coffee machine. As a result, your teams are often scrambling to gather and confirm details and requirements from stakeholders, and you don't always have the opportunity to lend your strategic insight before an opportunity gets momentum and gets off the ground. The collaborative intake process does have the power to better connect teams with the needs of your internal clients and does effectively drive better outcomes for everybody. A collaborative process should feed, we believe, into your procurement software, because otherwise you're kind of still in a piecemeal situation. So that would and should eliminate manual data entry, therefore enabling you and automatically carrying through the details that give your team a real-time view into the pipeline. So it helps you scope out your workload and forecasting as well. So if we look in pillar 2 now, RFP, peer, and data and benchmarking, RFP collaboration requires peer data and benchmarking. I know that's the goal. I will really highlight sometimes that's not achievable just based on constraints, but accessing RFP industry benchmark data from thousands of solicitations can help more effectively structure your RFP, that wisdom of the masses, let's hope, while shortening the research timeline. Benchmarks on elements such as criteria weighting, timelines, project structure is useful. I know this probably resonates when you're all facing new, unfamiliar opportunities. And this data can also help level set expectations with your stakeholders, ensuring they understand the typical timeline and criteria weighting, and they can expect, then there's less surprises in the evaluation process. But so it's very much, you'll see here, we do have some screenshots for those of you who are unfamiliar with our system, where we had introduced, I think a couple of years ago now, but time's relative these days, hey, in the sense of we have a benchmarking feature, and that really was designed because we had the questions coming into our client success team and our implementations team on the regular of, I have the XYZ RFP that I'm supposed to run, in a couple, days, weeks, what have you. Have any of your organizations run something similar? And so we really realized we had to, yes, we would then connect and provide feedback ourselves to support yourselves with those outcomes. But the goal was then you could have that data at your fingertips. So that was very much the design here. If you're wondering sort of what is that view in front of you as well. And that really did take a new reality when we had the pandemic onset, and you all of a sudden had municipalities that were purchasing medical equipment, and we had medical agencies here that have been purchasing that sort of equipment for years that could then share their insight on how they negotiate, scope, all of that accordingly. So it can help also break down silos across industry and organization as the needs shift. as well. So let's look at pillar 3, which is shared RFP samples and templates. So this is the third pillar, and it is, of course, about accessing those samples and those templates. So collaborative searchable RFP catalogs provide your teams with an easy way to harness existing real-world samples and documentation. So, to avoid or completely eliminate the need to start an RFP from scratch. After all, you can get requests for anything from, pothole patching to software to PPE. So what is your first response? I'm curious for yourselves when you're searching. You're trying to research essentially for a new RFP or something unfamiliar. Typically Google is my assumption. I know many of you are part of purchasing communities on large, so there's some forums out there. I know many times I'll hear people mention anecdotally, they'll reach out through, NIGP or whatnot if they are part of that forum, let's say, but, insert the one that's relevant to you to get feedback on XYZ, or how to interpret this, that, or the other when on a researching perspective. And that takes time, right? That's not, that doesn't go unnoticed, the amount of effort that takes. So that is why, if you could imagine, it's really important to think through the idea of like where you are not only scoping out the opportunity, you're also it's not within your right to have that research and that data available to you in the same system. So you're not having to go outside of the system to find the best practices. It's shown to you through benchmarks, etc. So that is important, and that is why having access to best-in-class RFP examples is fundamental to a more streamlined RFP process. And these, of course, can be sourced from catalogs, which compile both historical and new RFPs from public procurement teams across various agencies. So you can use your discernment based on regional and variations in legislation, or the type of scopes can evolve based on, where if you're north or south of the border, but at least you have those insights that give you a foundation to begin from. So I will highlight, and everybody here either uses Bonfire, I'm from it. So you can explore Bonfire's own RFP catalog and start accessing free templates from your peers by going to Go Bonfire, that's gobonfire.com/free little dash templates. So I will highlight too, we launched that feature last year, and whether you're a current user, you can access the templates, or even if you're not a Bonfire organization at this time, you can access free templates right now. So the goal is, and this is really very much ingrained in our values, everyone should be able to, we really want to accelerate purchasing teams, regardless of whether or not they use Bonfire for now, but the goal is you join our community at one point. So either way, you can use this software, this access now, and there's really no gotchas. You can access the templates at this moment in time, and it is a free feature. And then pillar 4, finally, the fourth pillar is about collaborative editing and approvals. So there's a lot to unpack, I will say, in this pillar. And if you want to go deeper, I highly recommend you download our RFP Collaboration ebook, which I will highlight will be emailed to you directly. So everyone following or joining this webinar, or if you signed up, you will receive that ebook. So essentially, this is where the rubber hits the road. So as you pull together stakeholder requirements, research, and sample opportunities and benchmarks, using, let's hope, collaborative tools like RFP editing tools and real-time messaging and in-app approvals. And I know this might sound like a dreamy future state, but it's all achievable now. The goal is to make the process smooth for everyone. So both your approvals workflow and RFP editing can be, made more efficient with features built into your e-procurement system that are designed to promote collaboration. These can include internal messaging, which, as you can imagine, enables yourselves and stakeholders and evaluators to keep all RFP related discussions within the platform. And that provides a source of truth location for all feedback and decision making. These features designed for sending and reviewing documents within your e-procurement system can also facilitate faster reviews and approvals, ensuring proper version control and eliminating the need to tie in additional systems. I will highlight too, and it can go unprioritized, but you can also have automatic notifications, which can eliminate the all too common, death by a million cuts that yourselves experience when so much of your time is spent giving stakeholders updates on projects or answering questions or poking them. I know we have this one feature that's, I think, it's quote unquote old, but it was just in like one, I don't know, V1 of our product, which essentially was, I think after X days, if an evaluator has a scorecard and they haven't, had traction with it in the sense of filling it out, they'll get a poke from the system. And I always just, it was so minor in my head as far as what all of the bells and whistles in our platform. But every time I was onboarding an organization, they loved that. And I think that just emulates this example, right? Of it's just that all that time you're spent poking and essentially just project managing people, right? It's not the best use of your time. So again, just to regroup, setting up those automatic notifications, to alert stakeholders and evaluators of the project status changes and reminders. The goal is to free up your time, and then you can focus on, well, the other mountain of work I suppose you have, but the goal is high value work, strategic work. I think sometimes we get into these ruts of just becoming massive chunks of our days are administrative when it doesn't have to be that way. And the goal is that your tool allows your facilitation, so you can be more strategic, you can be more high level, you can actually work on a proactive reality versus a reactive. So the goal is that you have this expectation of the tools that you're using to move you towards that future. And on that note of future, for in every sector, the world is moving towards the opportunities that technology creates. So as you assess or have, hopefully, the best of breed solutions that can help you create the best possible RFPs, here are some things you should look for. We believe, a full feature document editor that exists within your system, that should exist. You should have that. You should expect real-time collaboration and RFP documents, so you can have comments, suggestions, and edits tracked in line. You also should have easy to access version control of RFP documents that can be exported from your system in a variety of formats. We also believe you should have access to templates for community projects, for example, open access community projects. So that's where you can access, or should be able to have access to, thousands, realistically, of opportunity content run by other organizations. And then within that, key data points that you want, whether it's like criteria, distributions, weightings, etc. You should also be looking for the ability to create and share project templates that rely on document libraries that are, a key definitive source of truth. So your teams are using the latest and greatest boilerplate. Sometimes I've heard from agencies, key that the data is cleansed and accurate, so you should be able to see that it's relevant. And you also should want built-in approvals for RFP drafting, including automatic notifications I highlighted and a messaging system to streamline collaborative process. So you really want to think about a solution that hits on the 4 pillars of the collaborative RFP creation that we highlighted today. It doesn't just make collaboration easier for your team, and at the end of the day, you, as you all know, very real way, you're accountable to your stakeholders, and so it makes their lives and easier, thus yours. And it does result in cost savings, vendor engagement, supports your vendor diversity plan, drives high ROI, and the goal is it enables compliance. So you will, at the end of the day, get your opportunities, quote unquote, out the door faster, which provides a better experience for all your stakeholders. And then, the ideal state is it makes the best possible use of taxpayer dollars as well. So as we highlighted, you will receive the procurement or the procurement manager's guide to rapid RFP creations. That will come into your inbox very soon. So after this, you're welcome to dive through that. I can say it's very actionable, which is nice. So whether you want to even, you want to share your learnings here from this webinar with stakeholders that you just realistically know won't watch the webinar by any means, you'll be able to leverage this document that's coming your way and distribute that internally as well. So on that note, I think we haven't had any questions. Yeah, and so if there's nothing that's coming in the chat, we'll close it down in a couple moments, but I'll leave it open for a moment to see if anyone has any questions or comments they'd want to share. I'm really grateful that yourselves were as attentive as you were. We tried to keep this within the hour, and by we, my team asked me to, because I'm known to be, I stretch things out and get a little too chatty, and when no one can give me that accountability, I'll stretch things out, but you're all busy. I mean, I started the webinar with yourselves have had quite the 2 years. The last thing I want is to add on 20 more minutes to your day. So, oh, we did have some questions. Okay, perfect. So I'm just getting those now. Okay, let's go through this. Thank you for the comments. I'm seeing, yeah, good. We're getting some good feedback. Yes, you will get a copy of this presentation. Please send the information. Okay, yeah, we'll make sure you get it by Friday. And then, so there was a comment on collaborative editing. So we will, I'm seeing your name, which I won't say to everybody. So we'll definitely follow up with that so that I won't be able to do a demonstration at this moment in time, but you know who you are. We will follow up about the collaborative editing after this. So I will acknowledge, or I'll keep myself accountable so that you have that. Thank you for reaching out about that. Amazing. So yeah, a lot of the quote unquote comments are either factoring in you want the assets we've shown you today, so we'll get those your way, and we'll make sure we get those to you by Friday. So thank you all so much. I'm glad to hear that you want these at your fingertips, whether it's, you know, the content we talked through today or open access community projects. That's the goal, is that these webinars don't just, you know, what's the word? They're not just food for thought. They, at the end of the day, move the needle, because that's the reality of your world. You need the needle moved. So I want to thank you all again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your weeks, everyone. And again, you'll hear from us soon in your inbox. So enjoy the rest of your weeks, everyone. Bye now.